Billionaire gave his credit card to a poor girl to test her, but what she bought broke his heart. The city of New York shimmered under the veil of rain, streets glistening with reflections of neon lights as expensive cars rushed by and people hurried beneath umbrellas. Inside one of those sleek black cars sat Ethan Walker, a man whose name carried both admiration and fear in the business world. Billionaire, genius, ruthless. He had everything that money could buy: luxury, respect, and power, but not a trace of peace in his heart. He'd built walls around himself so high that no one could reach him anymore. That night, as rain tapped against his car windows, his driver slowed near a narrow street cafe, a small place where laughter mingled with the smell of coffee and wet pavement. The engine suddenly coughed and stopped. Ethan sighed impatiently, glancing at his gold watch, irritated that even his expensive car dared to fail him. While the driver checked under the hood, Ethan decided to wait inside the cafe. As he stepped in, the warm air hit his face, carrying the aroma of freshly brewed coffee and baked bread. Behind the counter stood Lily, a young woman in a faded uniform, her hair tied in a messy bun, dark circles under her eyes revealing sleepless nights. She moved quickly, taking orders, cleaning tables, smiling at every customer despite her exhaustion. Ethan sat by the window, his presence commanding quiet attention, his tailored suit sharply contrasting with the simplicity around him. Lily, unaware of who he was, approached with a polite smile, clutching a tray that trembled slightly in her hands. "What can I get you, sir?" she asked softly. "Black coffee," Ethan replied, not looking up from his phone. Moments later, as she placed the cup on his table, a customer behind her called out, and in that hurried moment, her elbow caught the cup, spilling hot coffee across his suit. Gasps filled the cafe. Lily's face turned pale as she scrambled to wipe it off, stammering, "I'm so sorry, sir. Please don't tell the manager. They'll deduct it from my pay. I can't—" Ethan looked up then, his piercing blue eyes locking with hers, and for a moment the cold billionaire felt something shift inside him. Her eyes weren't filled with fear of him. They were filled with worry, exhaustion, and a sadness he couldn't ignore. Instead of anger, he gave a faint smirk. "You think I care about a few drops of coffee?" His tone was calm, almost teasing, and Lily blinked in disbelief. Most rich men she had met would have shouted, demanded her firing, humiliated her. But he didn't. She muttered an apology again, and he waved a hand dismissively, watching her rush to another table, still flustered, but trying to smile through it. Ethan leaned back in his chair, curiosity creeping into his otherwise guarded heart. Who was this girl working this hard, apologizing for mistakes that weren't even her fault? Something about her honesty, her pure nervousness, felt different. When she returned with a towel, he asked, "Do you always worry this much?" She looked confused, but answered honestly, "When one mistake can cost you a week's meals, yes, sir." That struck him deeper than he expected. For a man who could lose millions in a day without blinking, her words carried a weight he'd never known. He studied her face, the tired yet kind eyes, the sincerity in her trembling voice. She was poor, yes, but she carried a dignity that money couldn't buy. Ethan reached into his pocket, pulled out his black credit card, the one with no limit, the one that symbolized his world of excess. He held it out casually, his expression unreadable. "Here," he said, "buy whatever you want." Lily froze, staring at the card like it was a trick. "Sir, I can't take that," she whispered. "Why would you give this to me?" Ethan tilted his head, his gaze sharp yet strangely gentle. "Let's just call it an experiment." His tone was low, deliberate, almost testing. The cafe grew quieter around them, as if the rain outside paused to listen. Lily hesitated, her fingers trembling as she looked between the card and his face, trying to understand if he was mocking her or testing her. "What kind of experiment?" she asked cautiously. Ethan rose from his chair, buttoned his coat and said, to see what people do when they're finally given the choice they always wanted. His driver appeared at the door, signaling the car was ready. Without another word, Ethan turned and walked out, his polished shoes tapping softly against the floor. Lily stood frozen, clutching the credit card like it burned her skin, her heart pounding in confusion. She watched him disappear into the misty rain, leaving behind a mystery she couldn't explain. The cafe buzzed again, customers whispering, but Lily remained silent, staring at the card, its dark surface reflecting her uncertain face. She didn't know that this strange encounter would change her life forever, and neither did Ethan Walker, who sat back in his car, glancing once more through the rain-streaked window, thinking about the girl who looked at him not with greed, but with fear and honesty. For the first time in years, he smiled faintly, not out of pride, but curiosity. The test had begun, and deep down, he didn't know that he was the one about to be tested. Lily stood alone in the dim cafe after Ethan's car vanished into the misty rain, her fingers tightening around the black credit card that seemed to hum with silent power. The world around her felt distant. The clinking cups, murmured voices, and the faint hiss of coffee machines all fading beneath the weight of the impossible choice in her hand. The night stretched endlessly as she stared at the card, her mind racing with disbelief. She placed it in her apron pocket as if hiding something sacred and dangerous, us at the same time. When her shift finally ended near midnight, she stepped out into the cold rain, the streets glimmering under yellow streetlights. She walked home through puddles, her shoes soaked, her thoughts tangled between fear and temptation. At home, a single bulb flickered weakly over her mother's frail body lying on a thin mattress. The sound of her shallow breathing filled the silence. Hospital bills lay stacked on the table like silent reminders of her helplessness. Lily sat beside her mother, brushed her hair back gently, and whispered, "You'll be okay, Mom. I promise." But deep down, she didn't know how. She pulled out the credit card, running her thumb over the embossed letters of Ethan Walker's name. It felt unreal, like holding a piece of another world, a world where pain could be erased with a swipe. Yet that world wasn't hers. The next morning she confided in her only friend, Maya, who worked at a nearby bakery. When Lily showed her the card, Maya's eyes widened. "Lily, do you even understand what this means? This card could change everything. You could buy new clothes, a house, leave all this behind." Lily shook her head, her eyes distant. "It's not mine to use for myself," she murmured. "He said it's a test. I don't want to fail it." Maya frowned. "You think a billionaire really cares? He probably forgot about it already. Don't be foolish. You deserve a break." Lily smiled faintly. "Maybe. But I don't need a new life, Maya. I just need my mother to live." That night, Lily couldn't sleep. The sound of her mother's weak coughs echoed through the small apartment. She looked at the peeling walls, the cracked window, the old photo of her parents smiling in better days. Every corner of her home reminded her of dreams that had slowly crumbled. The card on the table glowed faintly under the moonlight, as if calling her name. She hesitated, biting her lip. The fear gripped her heart. What if this was a trap? What if using it meant losing something more than money could ever repay? Yet when she heard her mother moan softly in pain, the decision became clear. At dawn, Lily wrapped herself in a worn coat and headed to the hospital. Her hands trembled as she approached the billing counter. "I want to pay my mother's pending medical expenses," she said softly, placing the card down. The clerk looked skeptical until the system beeped green, confirming unlimited funds. Within moments, the impossible became real. Her mother's surgery was scheduled, the bills cleared. Relief flooded her chest so quickly that tears spilled down her cheeks. The doctor, surprised by the sudden payment, promised immediate care. "You saved her life," he said kindly, but Lily knew it wasn't her. It was that stranger's card, that unexpected test. She walked out of the hospital into the morning light, the city alive around her, her heart heavy yet strangely free. She passed a group of homeless men outside a shelter, the same one she had stayed in years ago when her father died. She stopped, watching them shiver under damp blankets. Without thinking twice, she entered a nearby grocery store and filled carts with bread, fruit, milk, and warm blankets, all paid for by the same black card. As she handed out food at the shelter, their grateful smiles filled the cold air with warmth she hadn't felt in years. An old woman took her hand and said, "You must be an angel." Lily shook her head, whispering, "No, just someone who got lucky." That night, when she returned home, her mother was being prepped for surgery, doctors moving with urgency, hope lighting every corner of the room. Lily stood silently in the hallway, exhaustion weighing on her body but peace in her heart. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to breathe. Later, sitting by the window, rain returning softly against the glass, she looked at the credit card resting beside her and whispered to herself, "If he wanted to test me, then I'll show him what real need looks like." She placed the card back in her bag, determination in her eyes. This wasn't about wealth anymore. It was about survival, about dignity, about proving that goodness still existed in a world blinded by greed. Somewhere in the city, the billionaire who had unknowingly given her a lifeline was probably sipping wine in a glass tower, unaware that his simple act had already rewritten the story of a girl who had nothing but heart. Ethan Walker sat in his high-rise office, the morning sun slicing through the glass walls and landing on his polished desk, where stacks of papers lay untouched. His mind wasn't on the million-dollar contracts or the phone calls waiting for his approval. It was elsewhere, haunted by the memory of a tired girl with honest eyes and trembling hands. For days, he had tried to forget the encounter, convincing himself that she was like everyone else, another face in the endless crowd that saw him only as a wallet with a heartbeat. Yet something about her lingered. Her tone, her fear, her refusal to beg for forgiveness. He had almost convinced himself that she'd taken the card and splurged on herself. That she was no different from the others, who pretended to be good until temptation touched their skin. But when his assistant, Mr. Graham, entered his office holding a file, his expression unusually tense, Ethan felt a strange twinge of anticipation. "Sir?" Graham said carefully, placing the folder before him. "This is the transaction report from the card you gave away last week." Ethan leaned back in his leather chair, his interest piqued, but his face expressionless. "Let me guess," he said dryly. "A spree of luxury stores? Maybe a designer handbag or two?" Graham hesitated. "Actually, no, sir." He opened the file, sliding the printed statements across the desk. Ethan's eyes scanned the page, XPs, stating the usual. But what he saw made his hand still in mid-air. There were no entries from brand stores, no expensive restaurants, no jewelry shops. Instead, the list began with St. Mary's Hospital, surgical department, followed by multiple purchases labeled City Homeless Shelter, donation, and supplies. Ethan's breath caught slightly, the words blurring for a moment as if his mind refused to process them. "She didn't take a penny for herself?" he asked, his voice quieter than usual, stripped of arrogance. "No, sir," Graham replied gently. "From what we could tell, she used the card to pay for a medical bill, looks like for her mother, and donated the rest to a local shelter. She didn't even buy herself a coffee." Silence filled the office, heavy and unfamiliar. Ethan stared at the page, the weight of guilt pressing into his chest like something he hadn't felt in years. He thought about how casually he'd handed her the card, how carelessly he'd turned her need into an experiment. For a man who prided himself on control, he suddenly felt small, insignificant even. "She helped others," he murmured, almost to himself, his tone soft but thick with something new, respect, maybe even remorse. He rose from his chair and walked toward the window, gazing at the sprawling city below, the same city he'd ruled from his glass tower without ever stepping into its pain. The world looked different now, colder. He saw the contrast. His skyscraper filled with luxury versus the streets below where people like Lily struggled just to breathe. He pressed his palm against the cold glass, his reflection staring back. Immaculate suit, flawless life, empty eyes. All this time, he whispered, I thought kindness was just another mask. Graham shifted uncomfortably behind him, unsure whether to speak. Ethan's jaw tightened. Find her, he said finally, turning around. The girl. Lily, I believe her name was. Find everything about her, where she works, where she lives, what hospital her mother's in. Yes, sir, Graham replied quickly, though curt. Curiosity flickered across his face. Ethan's tone softened unexpectedly. And don't let her know I'm looking for her. Not yet. As Graham left, Ethan sank back into his chair, the world suddenly feeling too quiet. He thought about the way Lily had looked at him, not with admiration but with confusion, as if she couldn't understand why someone like him would do something so strange. He realized now that she had passed a test he hadn't even fully understood himself. She'd proven that integrity still existed in a world he thought was rotten with greed. The thought unsettled him more than it comforted him. He picked up the report again, running his finger over her name on one of the receipts. Lily Bennett. The name itself felt gentle, genuine. He whispered it under his breath as if testing its sound. That night, long after everyone had left the building, Ethan remained alone in his office, staring at the city lights flickering like tiny stars against the glass. For the first time in years, his heart felt heavy, not from anger or loss, but from something new, something uncomfortable yet strangely alive. He remembered her trembling hands, her quiet voice asking, "Why would you do that?" And realized that he had no real answer. Perhaps he'd been the one searching for something too, proof that goodness wasn't extinct. And now that he had found it, he wasn't sure what to do with it. As the clock struck midnight, he whispered to himself, "I judged her, but maybe she's the only one who truly passed the test." The words echoed in the empty office, swallowed by the hum of the city below. He loosened his tie, feeling more human than he had in years. Tomorrow, he decided, he would find her. Not as a billionaire, not as a man conducting an experiment, but simply as Ethan Walker, the man who had finally learned what real wealth looked like. The next morning dawned grey and restless, the sky, heavy with clouds that seemed to mirror the weight in Ethan's chest. He hadn't slept much. His thoughts kept circling back to that report, to the girl named Lily Bennett, who had rewritten the meaning of honesty with a single act. He stood by his penthouse window, coffee untouched, eyes scanning the city below as if he could spot her somewhere among the moving crowds. Something in him had shifted. It wasn't curiosity anymore, it was need to see her again, to understand why her kindness had unsettled him so deeply. By afternoon, he ordered his driver to take him back to the small cafe on 5th Street, the same one where he'd first met her. As the car approached the familiar corner, Ethan felt an odd sense of nervousness that he hadn't felt in years. The place looked exactly as it had before, humble, warm, alive with chatter and the smell of roasted beans. But this time, when he stepped through the door, it wasn't as a billionaire seeking an escape from rain, it was as a man seeking something he'd lost long ago. The bell above the door chimed softly, and heads turned for a moment before resuming their conversations. Lily was behind the counter, her hair tied up again, her eyes tired but kind as ever. She was refilling sugar jars when she noticed him, and the color drained from her face instantly. The jar slipped from her hand, hitting the counter with a soft thud. "You," she began, voice trembling. "You came back." Ethan gave a small nod, his lips curving into the faintest smile. "It seems I did." She rushed around the counter, words spilling from her in panic. "Sir, I'm so sorry if I misused your card. I swear I didn't mean to take advantage of you. My mother, she needed surgery and I couldn't. Her voice cracked as she tried to explain, her hands fidgeting nervously with her apron. Ethan raised a hand gently, stopping her mid-sentence. You don't need to explain, he said softly. You already have. Lily blinked in confusion. Her heart pounding so fast she could barely breathe. The cafe had grown quieter now, curious eyes stealing glances at the strange reunion. Ethan stepped closer, his tone calm and sincere. You didn't misuse anything, Lily. You did something I didn't expect, something that reminded me what humanity looks like. His words carried no judgment, only warmth, and it made her eyes well up. But why? She whispered. Why would you give me that card in the first place? Ethan's gaze softened, his blue eyes no longer sharp with arrogance, but touched by humility. Because I was tired of people pretending to care. I wanted to see if anyone still acted out of genuine kindness. He paused, his voice lowering. And you proved that they do. Lily swallowed hard, her lips trembling. I wasn't trying to prove anything. I just did what I had to. Exactly, he said, smiling faintly. And that's what makes it so powerful. He glanced around, noticing the peeling paint on the cafe walls, the hum of the old refrigerator, the tired faces of workers. He realized how small his world of luxury seemed compared to the quiet strength of these people. Turning back to her, he said quietly, You taught me something no one else ever did. Lily looked up, startled by the gentleness in his tone. What's that? She asked. Ethan's smile deepened, not the calculated, camera-perfect smile of a billionaire, but something real, fragile, human. That kindness can be richer than any bank account. His words hung in the air, sincere and heavy with meaning. Lily felt her throat tighten, unsure how to respond. No one had ever spoken to her that way before, especially not someone like him. The man who had once seemed untouchable now stood before her, vulnerable in a way she couldn't explain. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The rain began again outside, tapping softly on the cafe windows, blurring the city beyond. Ethan broke the silence first. I looked into where the money went, he admitted. Hospitals, shelters, people in need. You didn't spend a cent on yourself. Lily lowered her gaze. I know, Ethan said, his voice almost a whisper. That's what impressed me the most. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other. The billionaire and the waitress, two souls separated by everything but drawn together by something invisible and true. The cafe around them seemed to fade away, replaced by a quiet understanding that didn't need words. When Lily finally spoke, her voice was soft but steady. So what happens now? Ethan exhaled slowly, glancing down at the counter before meeting her eyes again. Now? I think I start learning. From people like you. She laughed lightly, unsure if he was serious, but when she saw the sincerity in his expression, her laughter softened into something tender. He extended his hand, not as a businessman offering a deal, but as a man offering gratitude. Thank you, Lily, he said quietly, for reminding me that there's still goodness in the world. She hesitated, then shook his hand, her small fingers trembling in his grasp. Outside, the rain eased into a drizzle, and a faint glow of sunlight peeked through the clouds as if blessing the moment. For Ethan Walker, it felt like the first real morning of his life, and for Lily Bennett, it was the first time she realized that even the coldest hearts could change when touched by something as simple as kindness. Days turned into weeks, and something subtle yet profound began to change in Ethan's life. The man who once measured time by business meetings and stock values now found himself watching sunsets instead of stock charts. After their encounter at the cafe, he couldn't ignore the pull that drew him toward Lily's world, a world so far from his own, yet strangely more real. The first thing he did quietly, without telling her, was settle her mother's remaining hospital bills and arrange the best doctors for her care. He didn't do it for gratitude. He did it because, for the first time, someone's well-being mattered more to him than a deal. When Lily discovered that the expenses were paid, she ran to the hospital administrator in disbelief, only to find out it had been handled anonymously. But deep down, she knew who had done it. That night, she stood outside the cafe in the drizzle, watching the city lights shimmer across wet pavements, and whispered a silent thank you to the man who had changed her fate without expecting anything in return. Ethan, meanwhile, found himself restless in his lavish office, unable to focus on numbers or presentations. The faces of investors bored him. Their words felt hollow. His thoughts kept drifting to that girl in the cafe, the one who smiled through exhaustion, who still found joy in small things he had long forgotten. One morning, he showed up unannounced at the cafe again, not in his usual designer suit but in a simple jacket and jeans. Lily almost didn't recognize him. He offered to help her carry supplies, and though she laughed at the sight of a billionaire lifting boxes, he only smiled, saying, "It's about time I did something useful." From then on, their paths crossed often, not by coincidence but by his quiet design. Ethan began visiting the homeless shelter she supported, but he came as just another volunteer, serving food, folding blankets, sitting with people whose names society had long forgotten. He listened to their stories, stories of loss and hope, and something inside him cracked open. Lily noticed the change but never mentioned it. She simply treated him like a person, not a name in the news or a walking fortune. She invited him to share tea under the tiny cafe awning when it rained, and together they'd sit there, watching droplets chase each other down the glass. He would listen to her talk about her mother's recovery, her dreams of opening a small bakery one day, her belief that good deeds never go unnoticed by the universe. Her laughter was light, unpolished, and every time he heard it, it chipped away a little more of the ice that had built around his heart. He started realizing how different life felt when it wasn't about control. The first time she made him laugh, really laugh, he was startled by the sound of his own joy. She had dropped an entire tray of cups and then laughed so hard that even the customers joined in, and Ethan, standing nearby, found himself laughing with her until tears blurred his eyes. That moment stayed with him longer than any business victory ever had. He began noticing the world differently. The way the wind felt on his face when they walked through Central Park, the way street musicians played as if the world was theirs, the way children ran through puddles without care. Lily had shown him what it meant to live instead of just exist. She introduced him to simple dinners, to cheap food stalls where laughter was louder than luxury, and to long walks where conversation mattered more than destination. And every time he looked at her, he felt a warmth he couldn't name, a feeling that frightened him at first, because he wasn't used to needing anyone. Yet with her, need didn't feel like weakness, it felt like truth. At the shelter, he began donating secretly under different names, arranging new beds, medical supplies, and meals for hundreds of people. When Lily praised the mysterious donor, Ethan just smiled silently, watching her eyes glow with gratitude for a stranger she didn't know was standing right beside her. In those moments, he realized he didn't want recognition anymore. For the first time, doing good felt better than being admired. One rainy afternoon, as they shared steaming cups of tea outside the cafe, she said, "You seem happier these days." He looked at her for a long moment, rain glistening in his hair, and replied quietly, "Maybe I finally understand what happiness actually means." She tilted her head and smiled. "And what's that?" He paused, taking in her face, her simplicity, the calm strength in her eyes. "It's when you stop chasing everything that doesn't matter," he said softly, "and start holding on to the things that do." Their eyes met, and in that silent exchange, something unspoken passed between them. Something fragile, yet undeniable. Ethan found himself craving her presence, her warmth, her honesty. The mansion that once felt like a symbol of success now felt empty when she wasn't around. He began spending more evenings at the cafe, helping her close up, walking her home, sometimes stopping to listen to street performers or share stories under the flicker of city lights. Every small moment built into something larger, something he couldn't control or explain. The billionaire who once believed love was just a distraction was now falling, helplessly and deeply, for the girl who had nothing but a kind heart. And in her presence, he finally discovered that having nothing didn't mean being poor. It meant being free. Months passed, and the chill of winter gave way to the gentle bloom of spring. But for Ethan, every season now felt different, softer, brighter, because it carried the warmth of Lily's presence. The once distant, untouchable billionaire had become a man grounded in simplicity, his days no longer defined by meetings, but by moments. He found joy in things he had long ignored: the morning light through the window, the aroma of coffee brewing, the laughter that escaped his lips whenever Lily teased him. Their bond had grown silently yet deeply, like roots beneath the surface, unseen but unshakable. And as the weeks turned into months, Ethan knew there was something he could no longer keep buried in his heart. He loved her, not in the shallow, fleeting way he had once known love to be, but in a way that made him want to be better, kinder, real. So he planned something special, something worthy of the woman who had unknowingly rebuilt him from within. It wasn't a lavish party or a public display. It was a private dinner in a quiet rooftop garden overlooking the city skyline, decorated with soft fairy lights and white roses, her favorite flower. The evening air carried a hint of warmth, the city below alive with twinkling lights, while soft music played in the background. Ethan stood nervously beside the table, adjusting his tie for the third time, his palms damp despite years of business confidence. When Lily arrived, dressed in a simple blue dress that swayed gently in the breeze, his breath caught. She looked like the very definition of calm beauty, unaware of her own glow. "This is beautiful," she whispered, looking around the rooftop. "All this for me?" Ethan smiled, offering her his arm. "Every light here wishes it could shine the way you do." She blushed and laughed, shaking her head. "You've become quite the poet, Mr. Walker." "Only around you," he replied softly. They sat down, shared dinner, and talked about everything and nothing, the way they always did. But beneath Ethan's calm tone was a storm of emotion. He wanted to tell her how she had changed him, how she'd filled a void money never could, how every time he looked at her, the noise of the world faded. Just as he gathered the courage to speak, Lily reached into her small bag and said, "Before you say anything, I have something for you." She handed him a small box wrapped neatly in brown paper and tied with a simple string. Ethan raised a brow, surprised. "What's this?" "Just open it," she said, her eyes glimmering with anticipation. He untied the string slowly, his fingers trembling slightly, and lifted the lid. Inside was a handmade leather wallet, the kind crafted with care rather than cost. It wasn't sleek or luxurious. It was humble, honest, and perfectly her. Beside it lay a folded note written in her delicate handwriting. Ethan unfolded it, reading silently. "So you'll remember that money can buy anything, except love." His throat tightened. The words hit deeper than any speech, echoing through the quiet night. He looked, stared up at her, his vision blurring with tears he didn't bother to hide. "You remembered that day," he whispered, his voice cracking. "How could I forget?" she replied gently. "That day changed both our lives. But I realized later, I never thanked you for giving me a choice. You taught me that not everyone who has everything remembers what it's like to have nothing." Ethan's hand trembled as he closed the box, his gaze locked on her face, illuminated by the soft, golden glow of the lights. "You broke my heart that day, Lily," he said quietly, a tear escaping down his cheek. "But you also healed it." She reached out, wiping the tear with her thumb, smiling faintly. Then I guess we both passed the test. The air between them was charged with emotion, thick and silent, the kind that needed no words. He stood, taking her hands in his, their fingers interlocking naturally. I thought wealth was power, he confessed. But you taught me that power means nothing without purpose. You taught me what it means to love without expecting anything back. Lily's eyes shimmered, her heart full, her voice soft as she said, "And you taught me that even those who seem unbreakable are capable of change." A gentle breeze swept across the rooftop, rustling her hair, carrying the faint hum of the city below. Ethan pulled her closer, and she didn't resist. Under the wide expanse of the night sky, with the lights of New York glittering like distant stars, he leaned in and pressed his forehead against hers. "You've given me everything I never knew I was missing," he murmured. "And all I had to give was myself," she whispered back. Their eyes met, no longer billionaire and waitress, no longer divided by circumstance, but two souls who had found meaning in each other. Around them, the city moved on, unaware that on one quiet rooftop, love had rewritten the story of two lives. As the first drops of rain began to fall, they laughed softly, holding each other close, the scent of rain mingling with roses and candle wax. The lights reflected in the wet tiles like stars scattered at their feet. In that moment, there was no wealth, no poverty, just warmth, truth, and a love that neither of them could ever buy. And as Ethan whispered her name against the rhythm of the rain, the world below seemed to disappear, leaving only them, two hearts once worlds apart, now beating in perfect harmony beneath the endless, forgiving sky.